There is another way of reading it. If you add Sinn Féin to, say, the left-wing independents and to Labour, you've got over 50% there. There is the genesis of an authentic left-wing party. That's if you put Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael together, it would give them 40 if they were a right-centre party. There is actually a left-right division clearly now, isn't there?
Well, I think in its crudest terms it can always be put as an austerity, anti-austerity divide
but it is still left
of about
and right.
55-45.
Or left and centre.
But the difference is in 2011 the electorate assumed, and I suspect were entitled to assume, that Labour was anti that austerity. They've now taken a view, brutally, that they're not. And that's why they've moved in part to Sinn Féin and also to this collection of independents. I can't emphasise enough the underlying volatile factors that shape political volatility are there and are going to endure. The electorate are frustrated, fatigued, exhausted, and at the same time being told by everybody things are going to get better. I mean, the most interesting stuff in the exit polls was the fact that people don't feel, only about 14% I think of the population believe that their own personal economic circumstances have improved or are likely to improve in the short term. It
isn't next to the notion of Sinn Féin coming down the tracks.
The voters certainly are. The voters are way ahead of the media and the sort of political establishment. I think
they're still holding their nose, aren't they?
They are, and I think the media actually didn't see this coming at all.
Particularly the journalistic political establishment are holding their nose to an extent.
Yes, it has been a characteristic of what is commonly called the Dublin media to be much harder on Sinn Féin than the British media, for instance. I would agree with nearly everything Noel said. You know, there is great volatility, but I sense there's something more than volatility. I sense that these are defining years, and there's a straining to pull away from the old conventions and the old 2.5 party political system. I think is gone.
We're going to stick to.
Eoin, Broin, when are Sinn Féin going to be accepted by the middle class?
Well, one of the interesting things, particularly in Dublin, is
when you get Mary Lou, presumably?
A very significant number of middle class, and particularly lower middle class voters, voted for Sinn Féin in this election. In my own constituency of Clondalkin, 37% of voters voted for Sinn Féin, and very many of those would have seen themselves as, or see themselves as, middle class and lower middle class. I mean, I slightly disagree with Noel in the sense that I think there's a slightly longer term trend here that predates the economic crisis. I mean, let's not forget, traditionally, up to 80% of the electorate voted for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, broadly speaking in policy terms, two centre-right parties. What we started to see from the early 90s is that start to decline, albeit quite slowly. That has accelerated since the crisis. So what we are now seeing is, and I think your presentation of it is more accurate, is we are beginning to see the potential realignment of party politics around broad left-right lines.
So you want to do a deal with Labour and some... Well, would you look at them first?
I mean, in an ideal world, what I'd like to see is a Sinn Féin-led government. Now, if I had said that a year ago, people in the studio here would have laughed at me.
Who are you getting into bed with?
Oh, no, sure, I'll come to that, but more importantly than who you're in bed with, it's at what point do you decide to go into a coalition. A year ago, if I had said I'd like to see a Sinn Féin-led coalition, people would have laughed me out of the studio. Whereas I think now what we're seeing is this, the emergence of potentially a four-party system. Obviously, Labour are suffering at the minute under the weight of their own broken promises. But you're looking at the potential in the next general election of all four parties being contenders in and around the 15 to 25% mark. So what I'd like to see, first of all, is a Sinn Féin-led government. And where that's not possible, a government which is about delivering significant social and economic change. And if it's not willing to do that, Sinn Féin won't participate.
So you should be looking at Labour and left-wing independents, shouldn't you?
For example, where I am in South Dublin County Council, we have formed for the second
council... You're not going to answer that question.
Oh, I am for the second. I absolutely am. But with
we can't be here all night.
For the second council term in a row, a Sinn Féin, Labour and Progressive Independent alliance which ran South Dublin County Council better than any Dublin local authority for the last 5 years and will do so again today. So my preference is very clearly for a left-of-centre government. Of course, the reality is the Labour Party will probably have a very bad day in the next general election, so whether or not those numbers allow for that, we don't know.
Something the Joan of the Labour Party is not interested in, Noel.
I wouldn't be printing the Mary Lou for Taoiseach or Jerry for Taoiseach posters yet. I mean, I'd avoid the same Gilmore-like mistake. But it's worth...
There's a quite interesting female politician in terms of their European victories, both in Dublin and in Munster. I can't quite remember female politicians in the Dáil of that quality before, with those sort of attitudes.
I think the woman factor has
been very powerful,
a
hasn't
major winning factor for Sinn Féin. And you would have to look at the party and say that because of its promotion of women and the particular women candidates that it chose, that it does seem to be sincere about equality, unlike other parties. Just listening to
your taxation policies, and when you tell the middle class that if they earn more than 80k a year, you're going to be whacking money off them, that'll go down.
Well, if they're earning over 100,000 euros a year,
it's 100,
and not whacking huge amounts of money off them, asking to pay a very modest extra 7 cents in every euro earned over 100,000 euros a year. Compare that to what the current government is doing, which is why the Sunday Independent poll found very clearly that people actually now see Fine Gael as a high tax party, because why? They're heaping all the additional burden of taxation on low and middle income families and leaving the very wealthy getting off, relatively speaking, scot-free. So I look forward to the election contest where we can start to have a serious debate about the kinds of, and not just tax policies, but the types of social policy, economic policy alternatives that a society can do if it wants something different.
And a wealth tax?
It has, absolutely, a wealth tax is...
Where does that click in? 130, 140?
Well, no, wealth tax is on your net assets. So
will that include farmland?
Not if it's working farmland, not, for example, business assets, not, for example, pension funds.
What's working farmland?
Farmland that's currently been occupied as a productive farm, as opposed to land that's been held speculatively.
If the farmer's not able to work it and he's not well, he'll pay tax.
No, it can be declared. It can be declared as working farmland, and actually, we've produced detailed legislation. The legislation is based on international best practice of where these taxes work very well, and a modest 1% wealth tax on net assets in excess of €1 million would not only generate a very significant amount of revenue, for example, for investment and job creation, but it actually would create a more fair tax system. They work in other small, highly competitive economies. If they work there, they can work here. And it is much better than heaping all of the burden on hard-pressed, struggling, debt-ridden families with a property tax, with water taxes, with changes to PSRI and increases in VAT. Remember this, there are 2 billion more of cuts and tax increases on low and middle income earners coming down the line. That will place huge stress on ordinary working families and those dependent on social welfare, and that will place enormous stress on this government.
That figure isn't finalised. One of the things that all the political parties agree, even Sinn Féin, is that the deficit target has to be met. Now, Sinn Féin's way of reaching it is a bit different to everybody else's, because they don't want to tell us how they're going to reach it. We'll tell you how we'll reach it, and we'll tell you in the budget. Some of the other opposition parties, even Fianna Fáil, will cost their proposals. They won't copy and paste pieces here and there and not cost them.
Sinn Féin's budget for this year was costed twice. The first time through the parliamentary question system, the Department of Finance.
Yeah, but you take an a la carte approach to what you're going to include and
the second time through the Department of Finance costing budgets. It's a lie to come on national television and say our budget wasn't costed. It was costed twice.
Even Fianna Fáil,
so at least be honest in your criticism.
Even Fianna Fáil have found you out for not costing your budgets.
Growth could give this government a bit of breathing space into next year. Growth could make all the difference in terms of those economics if it comes.